Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today I'm going to be giving the perspective of the historians who believe that Germany could have won World War II. Most of this is going to be outside of the realm of ideology, which, in my opinion, impacts and changes everything about World War II and what the outcomes could have potentially been. However, as I'm not a psychologist and it's all but impossible to determine what personality traits and beliefs would lead a person to do or not to do with any real certainty, here we are looking at tactical realities on the ground and grand strategies outside of anything related to ideology. First off, we'll start with the Battle of Britain. This air battle takes place over the English Channel and over the skies of Britain and plays a crucial role for the future invasion of Britain. How would losing the Battle of Britain change the war overall? It's hard to say exactly, as all of these things we are playing with are counterfactuals, but I've heard the argument that Germany could not have invaded Britain because of the strength of the British Navy. But if the Germans have total air superiority, that completely changes the equation with the British Navy. But first, could Germany have actually won the Battle of Britain? Well, interestingly, instead of going to historical sources for the answer to this question, we're going to go back to school. Researchers at St. John's University put together a mathematical model to imitate the Battle of Britain. Then, using a statistical model known as bootstrapping, which uses replacement data, the replacement data in this case being when and what the Germans attack in the Battle of Britain, they are able to create many simulated samples of the broader outcome. Essentially, they take two specific data sets and replace them, and then simulate the broad battle over and over to see the outcome and determine statistical probability. What they found was that by moving the start date of the campaign up by 3 weeks, and by focusing German Luftwaffe attacks on RAF airfields continuously, the odds of a German victory in the Battle of Britain are significantly higher. So much higher, in fact, that if the actual probability of the battle in real life were 50-50, those two changes alone would have moved the probability to 90-10 in favor of the Germans. Winning the Battle of Britain could have actually brought about an invasion of the island, ending the blockade of Germany by the British Navy, or even forced the British to the negotiation table by making the British believe that invasion was completely inevitable and the Luftwaffe would have complete control of the skies for it. Option number 2 here is not having a frontal assault on the Soviet Union. This one actually seems rather obvious to me, and yet it's rarely discussed outside of a history classroom or book. As British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery said, quote, "One of the first rules of war is don't march on Moscow." As Tick discussed in his video, oil is a main factor and concern for Germany and hugely impacts their decision to attack the Soviet Union. And while he is correct that oil is in fact the main concern, there is another option rather than opening a full-scale offensive on the Eastern Front. South. Specifically, a campaign focused on North Africa. The British themselves saw this avenue open to the Germans and openly acknowledged the danger in the situation. If the Axis had used their resources instead of getting ready for and carrying out Operation Barbarossa in the Soviet Union, and instead focused on taking the Suez Canal, something that could have been achieved with far less armored divisions than they had overall, then they could have pushed Britain completely out of the Mediterranean. From here, all of North Africa would be the missions, with the Germans, instead of relying on the Italians, taking over themselves. Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, French North Africa, Dakar on the Western African coast. With this strategic position, Germany would have the complete upper hand in air and submarine power to control the South Atlantic trade routes. With the Allies pushed entirely out of the region in any meaningful way, and the trade routes now being patrolled, Germany would immediately get the concessions of Greece and Yugoslavia, adding them to the rest of the southeastern European countries that had already conceded or jumped in on the side of the Axis. And 3, leading off where 2 ended, with the Axis taking of the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, and North Africa, there is now a straight shot for Germany to the Middle East. And while controlling some of the South Atlantic trade routes would change the blockade status for the Germans that they had been under since the start of the war by the British, taking the Middle East would change the strategic balance of power and the Germans' long-term oil problem. Oil production in 1940 within the region was the USSR at 29.7 metric tons, Venezuela at over 27 metric tons, Iran at 10.5, Romania at 5.7, Iraq at 3.5. So, while the Middle East is not actually producing enough oil to immediately maintain an offensive the size of the Germans' Operation Barbarossa, it is enough to sustain the strategic balance, and the amount of oil per month coming from the Middle East would rise with time. To put into context how much was being used in Barbarossa compared to, say, the 1940 campaign in France, the German Luftwaffe used 307 million gallons of fuel from June through December of 1941 in the East, compared to the Luftwaffe using 309 million gallons of fuel throughout all of 1940. However, that's not actually the point of this one. Because while taking the Middle East, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and the Arabian Peninsula, the goal would not be just to get the oil, but it would be to both isolate Turkey and force the British to mount a complete defense of India. Also, from this position, Germany is in striking distance of the Caucasus, putting an immediate and incredible amount of pressure on the Soviet Union to stay neutral in this conflict. This would almost certainly keep the Soviet Union out of the war in any meaningful way and force the British to continue to use large amounts of resources to protect India. From this position, neither the Soviet Union or Britain is in any position to mount any real offensive, and the Germans have the massive strategic advantage if either of them decide to act. Germany wouldn't even really need to use the U-boats to hit British shipping, as British alone is no real threat for a continental invasion, regardless of what the German U-boats do. Now, this is all hypothetical, and ideology may have pushed Germany to do something that upsets this balance after it is achieved. But from this position, for all intents and purposes, Germany wins the war. An attack by the Soviets would see their oil resources completely destroyed by air. Germany's position in the Middle East, North Africa, South Atlantic, and Mediterranean would make Britain all but irrelevant in this conflict. Germany would have access to oil, with monthly production in the Middle East continuously growing for any future major offensive. And their strategic position would be almost unassailable by any of the other powers in the war. If, at this point, Germany is short of anything like food, even though they have access to the South Atlantic trade routes, a future invasion of the USSR would happen from the south, going up through the Middle East. While these are certainly all hypotheticals, and I know the Germany of World War II is incredibly unpopular with the whole murderous genocidal maniac thing, I wanted to start to shed some light on the ideas that historians have who believe that Germany could have won this war, and I wanted to give some different perspectives from what I had heard online up to this point. And depending on how this video goes, I may decide to do a few more of these in the future. I appreciate you listening and following along with me. Put down in the comments whether you agree, disagree, what you think of the overall strategy or strategic balance. And with all that being said, I will see you all next time.